Hey everybody, I'm Jessie. This is Maisie. I've had a few drinks, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, but today I wanted to cover these two cans sitting right here. I have covered the topic on this channel a few times in regards to the importance of compact rifle options, and something that always comes up with those videos is the conversation of how gassy they tend to be, especially if you're adding a suppressor on. So I thought it would be good to have a conversation with you guys, kind of comparing these two here. I have the Otter Creek Polonium and the Dead Air Lazarus. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, and let's get started kind of talking about some of the pros and cons between these two systems. So flow-through cans like this one here are definitely something that are trending right now. You're seeing a lot more of these types of designs coming out, which is great. They're fantastic. Technically, flow-through is a trademark term. It's like chapstick. We all use it for lip balm. Hux, I'm sorry. I'm going to be appropriating this for this video. Bad. So realistically, when I say flow through, I mean high flow rate designs. Low flow rate like this one here, or traditional cans just trap the gas, but your high flow rate flow through cans actually have very complex labyrinths in them. The idea is that it's going to move the gas through more slowly and cool it as it comes out. 3D printing technology has gotten fantastic. So a lot of these cans now are 3D printed, which allows them to get much more complex designs, which of course allows much more performance improvements compared to what traditional cans have been able to provide. One interesting thing about flow-throughs compared to traditional cans is that the length of the can is actually a little bit less important, since we're able to 3D print those super complex designs, or even some that are manufactured, not printed. The length doesn't matter as much because the labyrinth inside, the complexity inside, is what's going to determine the effectivity in regards to that kind of gas control. Granted, this is a generality. For some of them it does matter, but you do get kind of similar performance to what would otherwise be longer traditional cans. The materials used for suppressors are typically going to be stainless steel, Inconel, which is like a nickel chromium alloy, or titanium. The Lazarus here is specifically what they refer to as Haynes 282, which for all intents and purposes, this is Inconel. It's a nickel chromium cobalt alloy, whereas the polonium that I have here is H900. It is a stainless steel based suppressor. You guys are gonna let me have a little materials engineer nerd out for a second. And this is pretty common for people who do know suppressors, but these stainless steel and the Inconel type based items are going to be much better at withstanding high heat usage, really heavy applications, people who are doing high rates of fire, frequent fires, lots of rounds. Whereas titanium is actually a pyrophoric material, which means that it's going to react with oxygen and heat, and every time you fire, essentially a bit of that suppressor is going to be coming out with the round. And every time you shoot, you'll probably see flashes of titanium coming out the end. So if you know that you're going to be firing with high rates of usage, probably avoid titanium suppressors. Honestly, I kind of feel like even with standard usage, you will have a shorter shelf life. But titanium suppressors are much lighter. So if weight is a concern, obviously that's a good route to go. Or if you're something like a hunter or just very seldomly shoot, not too many rounds a year, it is a great option. But for heavy users like myself, or real gun tubers who go through mass amounts of rounds, maybe stay clear. So before I start covering performance between these two, I do want to cover just basic specifications. I do think that's just as important. If you look at them side by side, you can see here that mount to mount that the Lazarus is a little bit shorter than the polonium is, the Lazarus and the polonium. It's about 4'7" inches for the Lazarus as opposed to 5'8" for the polonium. Obviously mounts and stuff make a difference. The outer diameter for these are virtually the same. You can see that they're pretty much identical in terms of their girth. So marginal, it's about like 5/1000ths of an inch difference. Very marginal. In regards to weight for them, this is without a mount. The Lazarus does come in about 14 ounces, whereas the polonium is going to be about 13.5.
There you go. Okay.
Again, mount matters. These weights are taken with nothing on them. But for all intents and purposes, these guys are pretty much a very similar profile. terms of diameter and weight, it's the same length. Obviously, the Lazarus is shorter. I don't think it's big enough of an issue to notice, especially because the weights are so comparable. On to performance, and if you guys will notice, this video is a little different than the rest. I have a bunch of people out on the range with me. Say hi to my friends. They are the people that I normally go out with, a lot of the guys who let me borrow some of their firearms. But I do think it's important to have opinions on something like this from different viewpoints, because everyone has different priorities when it comes to firearms and to suppressors. So I wanted to make sure I kind of gauged where everyone was at and how the general consensus was when comparing these two. I feel like when it comes to suppressors, the main areas that people are typically considering are cost. They're expensive, especially with the tax stamp. The gas flow. And sound reduction. Pretty amazing. Obviously, weight and size and all those other factors matter as well. Mount capabilities, you name it. But those are usually the three main areas that people are trying to consider. If you guys have been to this channel before, then you might remember that I am extremely sensitive to the gases that come off of firearms. Especially when you start going to compact sizes. It is miserable for me. I have very dry eyes, and it is difficult when I try to shoot something like a 10.5, 10.3, whatever, tiny sizes. The guys who I was shooting with in this video really don't care for the most part. Most of them can fire significantly larger bursts, larger groups before the gassing starts to be something that they notice or care about. But even with that, every single one of us were able to immediately notice the difference between the Lazarus and the polonium in regards to how much they were able to mitigate gas. Realistically, after firing this, I thought there was nothing. I was able to do significantly faster, longer bursts of firing and still didn't tear up. Whereas if I was using the polonium, slower rates, shorter amount of rounds, I'd get teary-eyed. It was hard for me. And every single one of us noticed that, despite the fact that we all had different levels of tolerances. Even if you don't think that you're sensitive to gases, your lungs still are. So while your nose and eyes might not be offended, if you do shoot a lot, something that's flow through and able to direct those gases better, in the long run, your lungs might thank you. Lung cancer is still a thing. One of the bigger areas that people like to complain about flow-through cans is in regards to sound reduction. It is the stereotype that flow-through aren't as good at that specific area. But I do think that's probably more specific to the older flow-through designs, whereas new ones like this here, you guys probably can't tell well in the video clips here, but shooting outside, and I don't have footage of it, but shooting in a range, I honestly think the sound reduction capabilities between the two were extremely comparable. You're probably wearing Ear Pro either way. If you're not and you're shooting with these, you're gonna wish you were either way. So even if there is a bit of a decibel reduction difference, probably not enough to be put off by one of these over the other. If anything, I would say I think the Lazarus is a bit more bassy. Those higher tones are still cut out between the two. I think it's extremely comparable. Those bassier tones that you get might be a little bit more prominent with the Lazarus, but those bassier tones aren't exactly as painful on your ears. So I don't think it's something that you notice as much. And again, depends if you're shooting indoors and outdoors. It's like a weird something else that's important too in regards to sound reduction is obviously the ammo that you're using, the firearm you're shooting it out of. So, I mean, I use the same setup comparing these two, but realistically, you look at a lot of data and you hear a lot of anecdotes, and they're not going to be a one-to-one, which makes it difficult to compare in that area. Another area that people like to really consider when they look at suppressors is in the dark to compare them. You can better see the flash that was coming off of them. And that's another area flow-throughs get a kind of a bad rap for. But you guys can see in the footage here that the Lazarus basically had the same flash profile as the polonium after you got past that first round. Obviously the first round is every suppressor is known to have a larger flash that has to do with the oxygen being burned up in the can as it's coming out, and then once you actually get that rate of fire going, it diminishes. So I do think for the Lazarus, that first round did have a more noticeable flash. Nothing too major, but it was more obvious. But once you actually got firing in, honestly, I don't think you can tell much of a difference between the two of them. And then obviously the big one was gas reduction. I already mentioned the Lazarus was much better at it. For the group of us, at least, it was pretty much the difference between being sprayed in the face, like absolutely insufferable, versus you can smell it a little. You know, the gasings are there, but it's just there, not bothering you, not tearing you up. So for me, this is an absolute no-brainer. But cost is obviously a major factor when you're purchasing something like this. The Lazarus is about twice the price as the polonium. So if cost is a concern of yours and the gassiness is not as much of a priority, polonium is probably going to be just fine for you. In regards to other performance capabilities, pretty much the same. Whereas for me, the gassing is a major concern and probably what I prioritize when I'm looking for a suppressor, considering what I normally throw them on. So this almost becomes a necessity, no-brainer choice. And obviously the gassing concerns largely depend on what you're firing out of anyway. If you're shooting something that's short stroke or something like the Keltec RDB, that's a very different gassing system, you're probably gonna be fine. Depends what you plan on throwing these on, if you're gonna notice or not. Something worth noting is in regards to heat dissipation on these. I do think that the Lazarus does a good job at not getting hot as fast. The polonium definitely holds on to that heat. It's just a matter of physics and how they're designed to work. I would be very interested to do kind of more studies, more testing, showing these under night vision and how the cans glow. I know brass facts and stuff, there's a bunch of people that have videos of these under night vision. So if you're interested in that more specifically, go check out one of those. Maybe I'll do something in the future. There is the elephant in the room for this video. If you guys follow me on Instagram, you might have seen it. But there's no getting around the fact that while I was filming with the boys to get content for this, the Lazarus right here became its own projectile while I was shooting and went flying across the range. After we had picked it back up and did a little bit of inspection, it became clear that the mounting system for the Lazarus, and again, I am using chemo for this one, but the mounting system for the Lazarus, the little pins in there, I'll post pictures, completely sheared off. So this is chemo, and it seemed like it was a mounting issue, but I do want to point out that Chemo has recently issued a statement in which they acknowledge that there has been a large number of claims, warranty claims, for their chemo mounts in regards to cat cans. So it seems like there was possibly a manufacturing issue, maybe something that worked hard into the materials too much and caused it to shear, things like that. I don't want to rag on them necessarily because between the group of us shooting, chemo is an extremely common mounting system. I'm talking about tens of thousands of rounds between the lot of us on multiple systems, multiple mounts, and no issues. This has been the first one. It does seem like it's a manufacturing problem and not necessarily an issue with the mount itself. I know people like to rag on chemo, but it's an issue that came up. That's not to detract from the Lazarus can itself. You can get it with the chemo mounts or Xeno mounts. Anything that it's hub compatible with, you can swap out and change. So if you don't like either of those, it's an option. The can itself is still great. Just, I wanted to note it for you guys because it is something that came up during the range day. Okay, Lazarus or polonium?
Depends on the gun, but for most things, Lazarus.
JP, Lazarus or polonium?
Am I poor in this situation?
You are poor.
Oh. I'm just gonna not have a can in that case. But if I could pick, I'd go with Lazarus.
Zach,
Yes.
Lazarus or polonium?
Well, Reddit does tell me I am supposed to hate dead air. And that Otter Creek Gang is life.
That's fair.
And as someone who does actually currently own both suppressors, I'm going to go with the Lazarus.
Measy. Lazarus or polonium? Measy. Measy. Okay, excellent choice. No, Measy. No, Measy, Measy, no. Measy, no, Measy, no. Cat. Lazarus or polonium? Okay. Yes.
The whole time.
Fair point. Thank you.